Modern Mahjong's here with a pop quiz. Do you know the answers to the 2025 National Mahjong League Bulletin questions? So, for those of you who are unaware of the bulletin, every year the league sends out an annual bulletin. It includes information about charity contributions, a letter from the president, Larry Unger, has important information, has a section on questions and answers, has an order form for next year's card, lots of information. If you didn't receive it, we're going to go through each question, or if you did and you just want some clarification, you're in the right place. We are following up with a letter. We already sent 2 letters to the league, and we're going to call tomorrow. We think, especially from the emails and messages we've been getting, there's several questions that could use a little clarification to clear up some confusion, and we'll discuss those as we go through this pop quiz. We've included some commentary of our own. We have unlimited space here, where the league has a small area where they're fitting these answers, so we will expand on some of their questions. If you're on Facebook and not yet part of our Facebook group, we invite you to join us on Mahjong Community. If you're on Instagram, we're Modern Mahjong. If you are on YouTube, not sure where you're watching this, if you're watching on YouTube, our YouTube channel is Modern Mahjong. Be sure to subscribe and get notified when we have new videos. ModernMahjong.com is our website, and we have a curated collection of Mahjong and canasta gifts and accessories. So let's get started. Question 1. Player A picks from the wall and has the tile in her hand when player B says she wishes to call the previously discarded tile. Player A puts the tile back in the wall. As a side note, that's correct. It goes back exactly where it was picked from. Player C, however, took that tile and mixed it up in the wall and said it was looked at, so she refuses to pick it up. What happens next? So the answer they gave was, once the tile is called and a tile already picked, but not yet racked, the picked tile is returned to the exact position from which it was originally positioned in the wall. Player C, who took that returned tile and placed it somewhere else, they now have a dead hand for a penalty of not following the rules and mixing the tile. If no one knows where that tile goes and it can't be returned to the right place, then all the hands are thrown in. So just some commentary by us if there was more room to elaborate. The window for another player to call a tile can be closed in ways other than racking. The other way they could rack it is if somebody went to call that discard, but the player already said, "Can I have your joker?" Or the player already said 2 dot and fully named the tile they were about to discard in their hand. Or if it touched the table, or if they called Mahjong. So all of those are other ways that that tile would not be returned to the wall. So just want you to understand that they're answering just the question at hand. We're just giving a little more context. Question 2. During the Charleston, is the passer allowed to take back or look at the 3 tiles? When is the commitment made? So a player is able to look at or change tiles she has passed if she's not yet looked at the tiles passed to her. You are committed to pass once you pick up the tiles passed to you. So just some commentary from us. During the Charleston, you take 3 out of your 13 or 14 tiles and pass them before you pick up tiles that are passed to you. So you should never have 17 or 16 tiles in your hand. You should always have at most 13 or 14 in the sloping part of your rack. If the player you're passing the tiles to hasn't yet picked them up, and you haven't picked up your pass from the player passing to you, you can make changes at that point. But once the player you're passing to picks them up, or once you pick up the tiles passed to you, you're committed if either of those happen. Question 3. Does a tile placed on the top of your rack have to remain there? Can you change your mind within your turn? So you see a discard, you like it, you call it, 2 dot, you pick it up, you put it on the flat top of your rack, and then you say never mind. Is that allowed? So the league said, once you call and place a tile on top of your rack, you may add or subtract from that exposure until you discard. However, you cannot change your mind and decide not to take the discard once you've exposed tiles from your rack or placed the discard on your rack. So some more commentary from us is whether a player is committed to an action depends on what they're doing. Are they picking from the wall? Are they discarding a tile? Or in this case, for answer 3, are they claiming a discard? In the case of claiming a discard, everyone else has seen that discard. So you have the most leeway here to change your mind. You could touch it, you could move it, you could pick it up. You are not committed yet. Once you take that discard and put it on the flat part of your rack, or once you take tiles from your rack and put them on the flat part of your rack. So once you expose tiles from your rack, either of those, you are now committed to making an exposure with that discard. And if you can't make a valid exposure, your hand is dead. So for a chart comparing the different ways you're committed, we have that in our visual companion guide for American Mahjong. Question 4. A player discarded a 5 crack, but mistakenly named it a south, and no one noticed at the time. Another player called for the south, displayed it in the flat part of their rack, and it was upside down. It wasn't facing the same way of the crack, so they really didn't notice it right away. A few turns later, the player that had the Kong of South reached out to fix the tile and turn it, and they realized that there was a mistake. The person writing into the league said, "We decided to let her put her tiles back on her rack and put the 5 crack back down in discards and continue on. Other than making appointments for eye exams ASAP, what should they have done?" So the league answered, "When you play Mahjong, you must look and listen." We say that all the time. It's a looking and listening game. The player should not have picked up the incorrect tile, and their player's hand is dead. What this group did, the league said, was incorrect by letting the player continue to play. So our commentary is a player can't call their own hand dead. So even if, and it's in Mahjong Made Easy, it's written in different ways. It says could not and should not. But in either way, if a player does say their hand's dead, it's not officially a dead hand until another player verifies it. In this case, another player could have called that player's hand dead for having an invalid exposure. They had the wrong tile within an exposure. The player with the dead hand would stop picking and discarding. If playing for money at the end of this game, that player with the dead hand would still pay the winner. Question 5. It's my turn, and after drawing a tile, I realize I have 3 tiles available to exchange for another player's 3 jokers. Can I take all 3? The answer to that is a player may make as many joker exchanges on a single turn as their tiles dictate. Some more commentary from us. Be sure it is your turn first. And we'll say this over and over again. People get very excited when they see that they have a tile in their rack that can be exchanged for a joker. And as soon as the player before them discards, they take the tile from the sloping part and say, "May I have your joker?" They now only have 13 tiles and their turn began. Your turn begins when you have 14 tiles. So before you do that, make sure you either pick or call the discard, complete your exposure, because once you do a joker exchange, you can't add to it. So either call or pick, then ask for a joker exchange. And you could do as many as you want in a single turn. If you're doing it from another player's rack, you need to announce it and say, "May I have your joker?" If you're doing it from your own rack, some people think it's strategy to not announce it. The league has said it is courtesy to make a comment about it, but there is no specific rule requiring you to. But you could do as many jokers as you are lucky enough to be able to do. Question 6. What is the correct way to pick tiles when you're playing with 3 players, a 3-handed game? All 3 players, beginning with East, take their own tiles. This is just like in a regular game. There's no dealer. Take their own tiles, with East starting at 4 at a time until everyone is 12. So 4, 4, 4, 8, 8, 8, 12, 12, 12. Then East takes 1. The other players take 1. Everybody now has 13. East takes a 14th. The reason you don't do 1 and 3, and we have a visual of this in our visual companion guide for American Mahjong, that is a shortcut to getting the correct number of tiles when you have 4 players. If you took 1 and 3, it would be the East getting the wrong tile. When you do play with 3, the Charleston's omitted, and East just begins the game by discarding the first tile. So just some commentary. The league jumped right into how to take the tiles. This is assuming you already built the walls, rolled dice, East counted off how many tiles, and took the next first 4 tiles after breaking the wall. So the same method of setting up and breaking the wall are in effect. It's just that you don't take the top first and third. East only takes 13th. Everybody takes their 13th, and then East takes their 14th tile. Moving on to number 7. Can I call a tile for an exposure and then in that same turn retrieve a joker for someone else's exposure and add it to my own exposure? So the league answered with, you cannot call a tile for an exposure and in the same turn retrieve a joker and add it to an exposure. An addition to an exposure may never be made. So our commentary, once you initiate a joker exchange or discard, your exposure is locked and can't be changed. So the only thing here that we think they were kind of missing is they said that you can't call an exposure and in the same turn retrieve it and add to the exposure. An addition can never be made. We just want to make sure everyone knows that once you discard, you're locking it, or once you make a joker exchange, you're locking it. Your turn ends or your exposure is complete. Question 8. What happens if two players both call your discard? Who gets the tile? So in this question, the league answered correctly, but we know that there's confusion about whether Mahjong takes precedence over an exposure. So I think what they were intending to do when they were saying either for Mahjong or an exposure, in the rule book, it's more drawn out. If you have a call for Mahjong and Mahjong, if you have a call for an exposure, that's when the exception to next in line kicks in. If one player calls for Mahjong and the other players are calling for an exposure, Mahjong wins. Mahjong takes precedence. So the answer they gave was when two players call for the same discard, either for Mahjong or an exposure, the next player has preference except when one of the callers has begun to expose tiles. This is not relevant to previously exposed tiles. So hopefully on next year's card, they won't say, I think the wording was changed. It used to say has begun to expose, and here they say has exposed. So a lot of people thought that that meant if somebody was playing an exposed hand versus a concealed hand, you had preference. This has nothing to do with previously exposed tiles. This is only having to do with tiles that match the current discard. So if one player calls for Mahjong and the other for an exposure, Mahjong takes precedence. And we discuss this in depth in our book. And we have followed this up with a letter to the league. And when we hear, and we're going to call tomorrow, when we hear back, we will update in the comment section with more information. Question 9. Player A throws a 3-dot. Player B calls the 3-dot, places it on a rack, adds a joker, and a 3-bam. So here they have a 3-dot, a joker, and a 3-bam in one exposure. They realize they don't have a 3-dot in their hand. They can't fix it. It's exposed on her rack. She has 14 tiles, and she's declared dead. So now what happens? She's declared dead before she discarded. Does she throw out a discard, or does play resume and she keeps that tile in her hand and she has 14 tiles with a dead hand? The answer is her hand is declared dead and she does not discard. So a lot of times this question comes up in different ways. And if somebody doesn't realize that they're dead until after they discarded, then they already discard and the discard remains. Here, someone recognized that her hand was dead before she discarded, so she keeps the tile in her hand. Nobody, and this is kind of a caveat to this, if somebody else needed that 3-dot for an exposure, they would not be able to call it for an exposure. The tile stays with the dead hand. If they needed that 3-dot for Mahjong, then it would have gone to them for Mahjong. Question 10. Can a player call one of the wins and then rack news if it isn't for Mahjong? And we think with the person writing in, when they said rack, we usually use the term rack to mean put in the sloping part of your rack. I think here they meant expose. Isn't that the same as picking up one of a pair to expose during play, not for Mahjong? So here we're just talking about how we believe the question was referring to exposing, not racking. The answer here is very confusing to a lot of players. We've had a ton of questions in one day. The bulletin just started arriving in people's mailboxes today, and we've had a ton of questions. The answer given was, a joker may never be used in place of a single or pair in a grouping of single tiles. Well, if we go back to the question was, can a player call one of the wins? So the question wasn't asking about a joker, so that's where we think the confusion is coming from. A joker may never be used in place of a single or pair grouping of single tiles, and that's true, and be never called for an exposure. That's true. The only for Mahjong is not that a joker can be called for Mahjong. They're reverting back here that a single tile can be called for Mahjong. So the joker and single were mixed up a bit. So you could see here, this is the letter we are sending to the league. We're trying to clarify some confusion. It's our understanding the answer would be clearer if it said a single, group of singles, or a pair cannot be exposed until Mahjong. If a player calls a tile and makes an exposure of any of these and don't have Mahjong, their hand is dead. So this would include the year, news, any other single, pair, group of singles. Now here, this is where they need to clarify. For Mahjong, any tile other than a joker, so a joker can never be called even if it gives you Mahjong, can be called even if used as a single in a group of singles or a pair. So if you're doing news and a joker's thrown, you can't complete any WS if you don't have the East with a joker. If you're doing news and you have everything else you need for the win except East, you couldn't call that East to expose any WS. But if that East gave you Mahjong, congratulations, you have a winning hand. So we sent this letter to the league, and we're going to follow up by phone call tomorrow. Question 11 is a repeat of question 3, so we'll move on. Now, question 12. You previously called a discarded wind and put up 3 winds and a joker on your rack. The final player discards a wind. Can you call that wind and replace the joker on your rack, then use the joker you exchanged for in the rest of your hand for Mahjong? Also, they asked, if the final discard is a joker, it may not be called for Mahjong. So I guess they were just clarifying that. So the answer is, you may not call a discarded tile and add it to your previous exposure. This is a dead tile. So we're a little bit confused with what they mean by that here. If, let's say, you have a Kong of Wests and someone throws a West, you can't pick it up and call it to exchange for a joker in your hand. No one can. Once a tile is down, you can't call a tile and use that to exchange for a joker. But a tile discarded can be used for either a new exposure or to call Mahjong. A discarded joker, and this is maybe what they're talking about here, a discarded joker is a dead tile. And yes, they are agreeing a final discard tile being a joker cannot be called for Mahjong. And I think that comes from a lot of people thinking that the exception to calling a single or a pair or a group of singles for Mahjong, I think a lot of new players also think that a joker can be an exception if it's the last tile you need. But that is not the case. You never can use a joker for a single, pair, group of singles. You can call any tile other than a joker if it's your winning tile for Mahjong. So just some commentary for us to clear this up. We would say that a discard can only be used for a new exposure or to call Mahjong. Once a player makes an exposure and then either discards or initiates a joker exchange, they are locking that exposure. That exposure can't be added to, can't be subtracted from. The only change technically is that if there's a joker in it, somebody could exchange for that joker. But the number of tiles in that exposure, whether it's a pung or kong, can't go from a pung to a kong or vice versa. And the dead discard is a joker. A discarded joker is always a dead tile and can never be called. Question 13. I called for a discarded 5 crack and accidentally put up a 3 crack with my other tiles. May I change my mind or is my hand dead? So their answer was, a player may change the number and type of tiles displayed in an exposure up until the player is discarded, which ends their turn. And let's just stop there before we get to the exception. We want to add that if the player, let's say, put up a 3 crack instead of a 5 crack, then they initiated a joker exchange, and then they wanted to change the 3 crack error and change it, they can at that point. Discarding ends and locks your exposures. Initiating a joker exchange also locks your exposure. So before you do a joker exchange, make sure you have completed that exposure. Okay, now on to their exception. They wrote, if a player accidentally exposes more than one pung, kong, quint, or sextet at the time a tile is called, the hand is now considered dead. And a lot of players are emailing us and messaging us and commenting on social media. Well, why would they do that? And there are actually some situations where we've seen this happen. So let's say someone hears 2 dot, but really a 2 crack was thrown. So they might put up the 2 crack or the 2 dot and then want to put up another exchange. You can't put up more than what matches the current discard that you're claiming. Or another situation might be, let's say you put up 3 6 bams and then you go to put up 3 9 bams thinking you have Mahjong and realize you're 1 tile short. Once you make an exposure of just the exposure that matches the discard, if you make any other exposures and you don't have Mahjong, you have a dead hand. So just remember, when your exposure is locked is when you either discard or do a joker exchange. And after that, no more changes. The league has in a box this new rule: a tile that is called for either an exposure or Mahjong must be placed on the top of the rack. This did not go any further than it has been since the 2023 bulletin. There's no penalty that we know of if this is not followed. Many people do institute a house rule that if you take a discard and put it in your hand, you have a dead hand. A lot of players take that off of the tournament play, which if you're playing in a tournament, many tournament directors require discards be placed directly on the flat part of your rack and not into your rack. And it's just to make sure that what is seen stays seen. And this rule doesn't go any further than where the tile must be placed. It does not say anything about what we consider best practices about the order. So in our book, A Visual Companion Guide to American Mahjong, we go into a lot of detail about what best practices on the order of discards and claiming. You should always first make sure that what is discarded is what you heard and see. Someone says 2 dot, but they only put out a 2 bam. If you go to put your 2 dots up or whatever it is and it doesn't match the discard, you now have a dead hand. So best practice is to first pick up the discard from the center of the table, place that on the flat part of your rack, then add tiles from your sloping part of your rack to complete the exposure. And this is a great way to prevent your hand from being dead if somebody miscalled or misnamed their tile. So now let's move on. So how'd you do? How did you do on these questions? And do you have any other questions or clarifications that you want to follow up with us? We're going to be calling the league tomorrow. We already have 2 letters that we are putting in the mail. So as soon as we hear back, we will update in the comments to wherever you are watching this. And for other information, save the date. Registration's open Monday, April 7th, 2025. We are back with Barney Galacio, 7 p.m. Eastern time. You can register now. It's on Zoom, so it's wherever you are. bit.ly is just a link shortener. All of those letters in there are case sensitive. So it's 2025 and then Modern Mahjong. The 2 M's are capital, everything else lowercase. If you don't want to do that, just take your phone and scan that QR code. It'll pop the registration right up. Please read all the questions in the registration carefully. We have we're going to increase capacity, but we are still limited in size because it gets very expensive when we get over 1,000 people. So if you would like to sponsor, send us an email. We are looking to see how that would work if we get a few sponsors to support going up to a webinar. We know that last year we had over 2,500 people sign up. So this year we've already had we just put it out today and a ton of people have already registered. So please read. If you don't get on the Zoom live, we will be streaming. So you won't be locked out of it. You just won't be able to be in the Zoom, but you'll still be able to watch it live. And some other things, if you are looking to learn how to improve your game in Canasta, Donna Miller-Small and I are going to be doing a live Zoom on January 19th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern. If you cannot attend it live, there'll be a private replay for 2 weeks after the class for players that register. There's nowhere to do anything online. It's just either pay 15 by Zelle or PayPal. Our account is modernamericancanasta@gmail.com. Soon as you pay the $15, just follow up with an email. We will write you back to let you know that we got your payment. And then when it gets closer, we will send information about how to sign on. We have great events coming up. Donna and I are doing events in Fort Myers, Orlando, Aventura, Naples is already sold out. We're trying to get more seats. Sarasota, back to Aventura. So we have a lot of exciting events coming up, and we are looking to expand to other venues here locally as well as out of state. So if you have venue ideas or you'd like us to come do a presentation on Mahjong, Canasta, card review, anything like that, email us at modernmahjong@gmail.com. And reviews are in. We mentioned a lot throughout this video, our visual companion guide for American Mahjong. It is a valuable resource for players of all levels. It's available on Amazon. You could get the paperback version or the Kindle. And if you don't have a Kindle, Amazon has a free Kindle download. So you could look at it on your Apple devices. And also, if you want to improve your canasta game or learn to play canasta, check out Modern American Canasta, the complete guide. Thanks so much for listening to this. We hope that you enjoy. Check out our curated collection of Mahjong and canasta gifts and accessories on our women-owned small business website. And finally, so we can do more videos like this, we invite you to like, comment, save, share. The more people that enjoy it, the more people that share, see it, pass the word around, the more people will play by standard official rules. And we love sharing rules, strategies, improve your game, and connect players. So with that, have a great day and a great game.